again, my name is Fredo Jackson. I am the Executive Director for Flint River Fresh. And I wanted just to take a moment just to welcome you guys to our Vegetable Gardening Basics workshop. And if we can, I know I have a couple people that are here. And so the way that this works is I'll just speak. If there's a question that you want to ask, I just need you to put it into the chat box. And by adding it to the chat box, what I'll do towards the end of the presentation is kind of like go through the questions that were asked. And then I'll be able to answer those questions towards the end. And again, if a question comes up, the best way for me to answer it is to have you just type it into the chat box. And again, at the end of the presentation, I will answer those questions at the end. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started with our presentation. It should last about 30 to 40 minutes. And again, this is a introduction, or what I like to call vegetable gardening basics, and we'll go from there. All right, so let me get that. There we go, see everybody. All right, so again, this is just an introduction to vegetable gardening basics. I like to call it going from gardens or grass to groceries. This workshop is done in collaboration and partnership with Doherty Fresh. And Doherty Fresh itself is an initiative, a partnership done between the Doherty County Board of Commissions, Flint River Fresh, and University of Georgia Extension, and it's provided to you guys by funding through the Aetna Foundations and the Healthy Cities and Healthy Counties Challenge. But what is Flint River Fresh? So Flint River Fresh, we are a 4-year-old nonprofit. We're based here in Doherty County, Southwest Georgia. Majority of our work is in 4 counties in particular: Colquitt, Doherty, Houston County, as well as Sumter County. And the work of Flint River Fresh is broken down into what we call 4 pillars. So pillar number 1 is about food access. So we are working programs to increase access to locally affordable, healthy food for our neighbors. Our second pillar is about youth development. So we're working to empower young people and create youth leaders by utilizing agriculture as the foundation. My third pillar is about local agriculture and economic opportunities for small scale farmers. So we find ways to bring the produce from the farmer from the field directly to people's tables. And our last pillar is about conservation of natural resources. And so Flint River Fresh, we are the urban ag arm for the Flint River Soil Water Conservation District. And so we teach people through technical assistance, on-hand demonstrations, how to protect Mother Earth and make sure that it's around for generations and things like that to come. But so today, why you guys have taken a moment is that you have the desire, the itch, so to speak, to grow food for your communities, for your family. And so the blessing that we have that here in Southwest Georgia, where we're based out of Growing Zone 8B, is that we literally can grow food year round. And I like to break it down to people that we really have 3 main growing seasons. And so on the slide, as you see, we have the springtime, which is where you want to get your seeds planted or your transplants planted from the middle of February towards the middle of March. But the main thing is really looking at our outside temperatures, our lows being in the 40s and our highs being in the 60s. That's kind of what my gauge for determining like our spring planting days. And then we move into the summertime. For the summer, we are March 15th to like July 15th, and that's going to be another workshop, as well as the fall, where we plant for the fall from September the 15th through, you can almost go like the mid-October, beginning of November, depending on certain crops. but I was trying to give people, you have like a 2-week to 3-week window to get most of your seeds planted and you planted for the fall season. Because the reason why I say we can grow year round is that our harvesting schedule, we never stop harvesting from the field based upon what we plant. And that's the main reason why I encourage people to get started in growing, because you literally can grow and eat directly out of your backyard or your community's food space year round. And that's just a quick breakdown. So like your spring harvest crops, you'll begin consuming those from like mid-March all the way through like April, end of April, beginning of May. Summer crops, May 1st until like the frost comes around. So if you planted some peppers, I have people right now still telling me that they're harvesting like peppers, even though there's a cold snap about to happen. So I think it's going to stop. But the idea is that until like a real true frost comes, some things you plant in the summertime, you can still keep harvesting them. And then you have like your fall crops, like, so if you got your winter greens and things into the ground, you're probably still at a space where you can begin or continue harvesting them, mainly from like the 1st of November all the way through until about the beginning of March. And that's the blessing, again, like I say, about being here in Zone B, is that we literally can eat from our growing spaces 365 days out the year. So for those that are newbies, I always explain to people that growing here in Southwest Georgia with those 3 growing seasons, you have what I tell people to imagine like a straight line. So what you plant in the spring will also be what you could plant in the fall, and the dividing mark in between both of them is the summer. And so what this is, it's just like a quick snapshot to kind of show you the different vegetables that you can possibly grow. So you have in the springtime and in the fall. So you have like your spinach, your arugula, your broccoli, your cabbage, your Brussels sprouts. And I'm making note that some things are, because of the amount of cool weather that you have, they're really only conducive for growing like in the fall. So I kind of indicated, and let me back up. The other thing too, this presentation that we have, as well as the video, will be available after the call, again, just for you guys to be able to share, be able to refer back to. So the PowerPoint slide, the link of the Zoom call will be made available for the public to be able to view, and for you guys just to touch upon it later on as well. So again, fall only crops are mainly like your Brussels sprouts, your garlics, your onions, your salads, your leeks. Then also I think I would add cabbage as another one, because like if it gets too warm too quickly, your cabbage doesn't normally have enough time to form its head. But in addition, you can still do your Asian greens, your kales, your collards, your Swiss chard, your beets, your radishes, your sugar peas, your English peas, and as well as your potatoes. And potatoes is a spring only sort of crop. I have tried before to do them in the fall, but haven't had quite success. I make some great seed potatoes, but not necessarily potatoes for consumption in the fall. Then also we try to encourage with our conservation side that people also get in the habit of planting flowers for our pollinators, and then also just flowers in general. I think are just a really good a beautification thing to do for most gardening spaces. So flowers that you could plant in the spring and the fall, your sunflowers, your calendulas, your snapdragons, your pansies, your violets, and your sweet williams. And then as far as herbs go, my main spring and fall herbs are parsley, dill, and cilantro. And also just to kind of give a teaser, we are at that cusp of where we're at the we're at the cusp as well, of where we're at the line where the summer and the spring are about to mix. And so with that, you can also do for the summertime just some things to be mindful of. You can start your artichokes, your green beans or snap beans, so to speak, your corn, cucumbers, eggplants. Also a good time if you're interested in doing like some ginger and turmeric to get those in the ground, as well as melons, okra, field peas, peppers, your summer squashes, your tomatoes, as well as your sweet potatoes, and some good flowers to plant during the warm season, your cosmo, your lentha, arugula, marigolds, petunias, sunflowers, verbenas, zinnias, and then your herbs, of course. And so a lot of these herbs we really like to use because they are beneficial. So just again, these are just some bases that you could do. So like some aloe vera, some basil, lemongrass, stevia, some sage, pineapple, Mexican sage, especially if you're going to try to make your own teas and things like that, as well as cooking. That's what our herbs and things are for. So this again shows you like a snapshot of diversity, because I always encourage people to grow, because there's more that you can actually grow in your backyard that you might even see available at your local grocery store. And that also allows for you to have like a diverse palette that you're eating from. And again, it allows for you to be very creative in what you consume, and it allows for you to broaden your horizons and things like that. And so that's just your basic summer gardens, what you can plant and things like that. And for those that are new, that have just joined the call, how it works is that if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box, and then I will answer those questions towards the end of the presentation and as we go forward. All right. Okay. All right. So let's get into the, let me back up. I think I go back one more slide. All right, there we go. Okay, let's get into what I call like the nuts and bolts of what this is about. So let's literally go from grass to garden to groceries. And so the next segment that I'm really going to focus in on is getting you prepared, making sure again, like the basics, but just having like a conversation with you on the things that we consider, what we think about when we're preparing like food spaces and community, as well as some of the things, again, that we encourage people to do for like their backyard gardens. So number one, site selection is everything. You want to have a location that receives full sun, as much sunlight as possible. But if it doesn't, we definitely want to make sure that it at least receive like 6 hours of sunlight, and we prefer for that sunlight to be during the peak part of the day versus early in the morning. And that just helps with like the growing for the plants for the photosynthesis. The other thing we encourage you to look at is your location of water. You want to be mindful of if you have a water spigot, or if you have like a well at home, or how you're going to water the plants. You want to make sure that it's convenient for you to be able to water. One thing you don't want to do is like log around, 5-gallon buckets of water like 100 feet, or even drag like 100-foot water hose from your spigot to like your gardening space. So you want to just make sure that the water is convenient, it's in close proximity to your garden. Other thing that you want to do is make sure that if you're going to do some in-ground planting, that the ground where you're planting that drains very well. You have to be mindful, even though we want plants to get water, there is a thing known as it getting too much water. Too much water can cause the roots to suffocate. They would literally just drown in that space. And so you want to have a way to test it to make sure that it drains properly. One of the things that we tend to do is just dig a hole. Again, this is for if you're doing in-ground planting, is dig a hole in the potential garden space, fill it up with water, let it drain out, fill it up again, and just kind of see how long it takes for the water itself to drain. Of course, you don't want something that sits in a puddle or a pond or a water presence for too long, because again, like I said earlier, too much water can be bad for the plants. And the last thing is that you want to make sure that you are growing in good soil. A good soil that has like a great balance of what we call a good pH, which is like your hydrogen level, has a good amount of like macro and micronutrients and things in there. And just to help you out, let me go up through the drainage test just to give you a little background what I said a couple minutes ago. So I'm skip that one just to read through. All right, so just your pH test. So you really want to make sure you understand the making sure that the plants have somewhere between 6 to 7.5 a pH level. And what that does is that your pH allows for it to your plants to be able to take up nutrients. And if your pH is out of balance, it doesn't matter how much fertilizers that you might use or how much compost you put into the space. If your pH is off, you won't be able to grow like a strong, healthy plant that you need. And it's important that you understand that. And one of the things I tell most people when you're about to begin your in-ground planting, please do a soil test. There's a couple ways you can do it. There's some at-home methods that you can use using vinegar and baking soda. And I have links to those towards the end of the slide. You can also purchase like a pH soil test kit from your different garden centers and hardware stores, or you could do what we do a lot is that we just take a sample to UGA, Cooperative Extension Office, and they mail it to their labs, and you get your results back via email in a PDF form. And it even give you recommendations on how to improve your soil, what amendments you need to add to it, on and so forth. So soil, understanding your soil balance is really key, because this is the matter that everything is growing in. And so just taking the time to get your pH balance correctly will help you start off on the right foot with growing and producing. Again, if you don't know it, some people have tried just to especially trying to do things organically and naturally. It's very important that you understand the pH of your soil and how to improve it, just for overall for growth of what you're growing. So got your soil, you got an idea, you're ready to go. And so there's just a couple, what we call basically, how are you going to grow it? What type of bed are you going to use? Are you going to focus, like what I was talking about before, in-ground planting, your traditional farm rows? Are you going to be developing like raised garden beds? Or are you going to be doing just your backyard, like container gardening? So these are just a couple different options that you could choose from, again, just to grow food for your community and to grow for your neighborhood, on and so forth. So farm rows. We do, again, at Flint River Fresh, we do a lot of various different gardening spaces, but we've kind of narrowed it down to like these three. So when it comes to like our farm row, what we kind of found is that it gives you, of course, more space like to grow. It allows for you to have more of a bigger footprint. You're able to utilize like the existing soil that's there. So there's no need to bring in extra inputs like compost, extra soil, things to work with. Again, you don't necessarily have to have any like carpentry skills. So you don't have to worry about like building frame boxes. You don't have to there's not as much like startup work that's needed for like the in-ground part. You pretty much just need a tractor or access to a heavy duty tiller to till up the spot to make it work. And then the other thing is that it's less permanent. So if you decide after a year of growing that you don't want to grow anymore, you can pretty much just allow the space to return back to its native, like the grass can grow back up. You can mow the space back again. And then in a good season, it's back to just like a field like it was before you started planting. And because of it having the native soil that you're using, your water input doesn't have to be as high. Again, the native soil, it kind of knows how much water it can hold. It will retain the amount of water that it needs for the roots of the crops and things like that. And then it also is just an easier irrigation system. So if you're going to use a basic overhead watering system or some of the water systems that we talk about later on, it's very easy to implement those into a farm row system versus doing a container garden or doing versus like a raised bed sort of garden space. And so a lot of times when we come into a community, one of the first things that we try to do is see if we can start with just doing some farm rows or in-ground planting before we decide to move into the raised beds or the container boxes, because again, it's a lot easier for us to get started. It's a lot easier for us to turn the ground and prepare it to begin to grow food for the community as a whole. So raised beds. This here has been like our staple growing area, especially when we do our school garden projects. And again, just because it's easier to manage. You have like a set space that's easily identified how big a space you're going to be working in. So you can develop knowing your space planting, the crop spacing, your different things, how to get the bed in order. And so it's easy for you to manage the space. Secondly, because it's like in a raised container, you don't have to worry about soil compaction. You don't have to worry about somebody stepping into the bed and damaging the plants unless you have four-legged friends and things like that. But we're going to talk later on about how to create barriers for those. But it pretty much, you have a safe space to grow in. And because of it being a raised bed, the soil itself is actually warmer than your native soil. So it allows for you to have a longer growing season for a crop versus you kind of waiting until the native soil or the farm rows get ready. Case in point, whenever we do the Sunbelt Ag Expo or the Georgia National Fair site or even other sites, we're able to start planting in our raised boxes almost 2 to 3 weeks before we can start planting for in-ground. Again, by the fact that you're creating this space, you're bringing in the inputs and so forth, you have like it's less weeding, less maintenance. You really just have to come out and check a couple minutes a week, and just to make sure the spaces are weed free and that the plants are well taken care of. With it being elevated as a raised bed is better drainage. You don't have to worry about that, the water sitting and creating like again, a pond around the roots of the plants. It's easier to amend it. So just off you just doing like the soil test and kind of knowing, you'll be able to add the correct balance of nutrients. And you can even do, and I'm gonna talk about a little bit later on, like a magic soil conditioner mix that kind of gives you that good balance of good pH, good, I like to say good sweeteners for your soil. And again, by having it in the raised boxes, you have like a space of, conserving. So you're not watering the entire field. So your irrigation and your water system are in this one area. So you're not wasting anything. The same goes with like your amendments and things like that. And then also, we've been found that it's easier for people with like disability or older age to be able to work the raised garden beds versus being out there in the farm rows. So again, it just allows for more accessibility for the garden space and things like that. And then so people oftentimes ask me, do you fill up the entire bed with raised beds or with soil or with compost? And I tell them it's twofold. Like when we do our school gardens, we tend to fill up the entire bed with a raised bed mix. And that's just because we know we're going to be really planting really heavily and intensely over the next like school year. But if you're doing like a backyard raised bed mix, you don't necessarily have to fill the entire bed up with the mix. You can actually fill up half of it with what we call like topsoil or just filler soil. And then the main thing is the top like 2 to 4 inches, have like a nice rich compost that you kind of mix in with the topsoil. And the blessing is that you could go by your box store and can pick up like black cow or like your mushroom compost and things like that. So you don't necessarily have to fill up the bed all the way, but you do with the compost, but you do have to have like some sort of filler soil just to make sure, again, it's connecting back to like the native grass and the native ground and things like that. And also with the raised beds, we encourage people to mulch it. And I'll talk a little bit more about mulching around the plants, but even around the size of the beds as you're building it up, just put like a layer of like cardboard and newspaper down or some sort of landscape fabric, and also just help with minimizing the weeds and allow for like the water and stuff to drain through in the raised garden bed in the raised space. So our new thing that we've really been encouraging is that like people that are beginners, that you could just do basic container gardening. And that's like simply taking a 5-gallon bucket, and I'm going to go through it a little bit, like just some of the fun things to do that with container gardening. And so you don't have to have like a huge space. It's just about having a container that you could grow in. But the things you want to just be mindful of with the container gardening is, number one, is that you have to have some sort of drainage holes in the container. Like I spoke about earlier, you don't want water to sit at the base of the plant around the roots because it can suffocate it and it will basically die off into the harvest. The second thing you want to think about is like how big of a container that you need. And with that, like some plants like tomatoes, eggplants, if you're doing like squash, they're gonna need a minimum of a container that's a 5-gallon or bigger. Now, if you're doing something like onions, you're doing something like beans, or you're doing like spinach or lettuce, you can get away with utilizing like a 3-gallon container to grow in. The main thing is, like I always tell people, think about how big the canopy or how big the plant grows whenever you walk inside the grocery store or whatnot. That'll be a good indicator of how big you need, what type of container that you need. The third thing to think about with container gardening is, are you planning to move it? Now, once you put soil in a 10-gallon container or a 25-gallon container, it's pretty heavy. And so unless you put wheels underneath or some sort of dolly system to move it, it'd be very difficult for you like to move it around. So just thinking about the container, again, going back to what I said earlier about sunlight and receiving enough sun, you want to make sure you think about all of that related just to your container gardening, as I said, and then watering. So again, you want to make sure that you have the means to keep it water, because the thing about a container, same thing about the raised garden bed, is that the soil dries up faster than if you did the farm row planting. So you really need to be able to check the water to make sure that you have everything for watering the plants. And then also with a container, you can only fit so many plants, or in some cases, only one plant per container, like based upon like the space of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the planting segment and like the spaces segment. And then the last thing with containers, you have to make sure that you have some sort of like a fertilizer schedule. So again, you want to make sure that at least once a month that you are feeding the plant with the fertilizer. And I'm gonna talk about what type of fertilizers we use at our community garden sites that'll really work for you guys. But you want to make sure that once a month or every 4 weeks that you're feeding the plant with an organic based fertilizer in order for it to grow. Because again, it doesn't have, like a lot of times in our farm rows, because there's already some macro and micronutrients that are already in the soil, that the plant roots can go find what it needs in order to thrive and to grow. But when you're in a container system, you are the feeder of the plant. You are the fertilizer for the plant. And so you want to make sure that you are properly giving the plant what it needs in order like to thrive, because you're growing this to feed yourself for your community. So you want to make sure that you're feeding the plant as well. So here are just some ideas when it comes to containers that you could like think about that you might have like around your house for just doing some container gardening at home. So you might have like an old ice cream tub, so you can drill some holes in it, that gallon of ice cream, and turn it into a container for your home garden. You might have like some like cans from like your green beans or your soups and stuff that could be really utilized for like growing herbs or special like kitchen herbs and things like that. Maybe you got like 2-liter soda bottles that you could invert again for like your herbs, or like get some seed start that you can use. You can even think about the milk jugs or the rotisserie like chicken containers, And then the last, I always tell people like those shopping bags, those reusable shopping bags. You might have collected enough of them through the years or through the months. You could actually repurpose those for growing. We've actually used those shopping bags to grow potatoes in. Because it's just a little bit easier for us to put 1 or 2 potato spud seeds in it, fill it up with soil, let it grow, and then when it's time to harvest, we just flip over that bag and voila, we got Irish potatoes that are ready. But then also, there are just some unique things. So this is something like wheelbarrows. Being that we work on a lot of farm projects and the wheels tend to break, that we'll convert wheelbarrows into like garden space, and there's just some really cool aesthetic things, Tires. There are plenty of those recyclable tire places that are around that you can use for the container, for like the wall of your plant. And again, a lot of this is stuff that doesn't cost you anything, that you could just find at a junkyard or a scrapyard and repurpose it for growing food. We like to call this upcycling. So just taking something, not allow for any waste to go into our landfills, reutilizing those materials like in our garden spaces, like an old like sink or old tub, that's an item that you can use. Or roll around a shopping cart. Like a couple of years ago, I actually had like a garden to go. I was literally doing presentations and showing people how we were growing out of old shopping carts that were just laying around like in the city. We talked to them and got a couple of them and really grew food, or a whole pickup truck. Again, a lot of what we do, we're in the rural South and there's just old abandoned vehicles laying around, or maybe there's like a old truck. Again, this is just something that could be appealing, just thinking outside the box of where you could grow food and how creative it could be. So going back to like the containers, like I said earlier, you control the environment, the element that the plant is like that is growing in. So some things that you need to just think about for your container is that you need to make sure that it can maintain whole water, not too much, has nutrients in it. Again, that's why we're going to fertilize it, even like in the mix. And then also it has to be able to support and be able to allow the roots to stabilize for the plants and stuff to grow. So overall, your container mix, it should be well aerated, it should be well drained, it should be lightweight. Because again, you don't want something to be too heavy. And sometimes the compost itself is a heavy mixture. So we kind of encourage people like to do a mix. And so this is like a basic sort of mix that we've been able to do for our container gardening that you can do at home. And most of these materials you can purchase at locally here at Mulch greenhouse, and then some of the stuff you can get from like Lowe's and Home Depot, on and so forth. But this gives you like a basic sort of mix for your container gardening sort of soil. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit further once we get into like composting, like the bulk stuff and things like that, where you could go if you're interested in getting like bulks of the material. But this is a basic starter mix where you're just taking like a 5-gallon bucket, and you are taking a half a cup of like a what I call like pro mix, which is like a seed starting mix. Added to that, a third of a cup, a third of the bucket and cow manure, mushroom manure, and then added like 1 cup of plant tongue, which is our organic fertilizer, and mixing it all in together. And that's the basic foundation. And as your container grows, you could just multiply everything off of a 5-gallon bucket. So got all this going, got your container, you kind of pick what you're doing, whether you're in rows or you're doing them in raised garden beds, or you're doing them in buckets. The next thing is about like your plant spacing. And so every plant itself kind of has like a core requirement of just off of like science and research. A lot of times when you buy like seed packs, it even tells you how far apart to put certain plants, like when you're growing. So it's just scientifically proven that you want to have like your corn, 12 inches apart, like in a row, green beans, 4 inches apart, eggplants, like 18 inches. So this is like basic information. And so the University of Georgia has actually created a document that you could receive from Extension, where they really go through and they kind of tell you based upon what you're planting, how far apart it should be in row spacing, how far apart it should be when you're actually planting it in the actual rows itself. So again, this is just like a basic to kind of show you, and we do this because as we continue this conversation, you don't want to overcrowd your plants in certain spacing, because it needs the right amount of spacing so it can grow up the nutrients that it needs. Oftentimes I tell kids, you don't want to have everything piled up on your plate. You want to like separate things, just relates to growing and habitats and things like this, on and so forth. So when it comes to planting, there's really three things that we really encourage people to do. So you have like your basic sort of like in-row planting, and that's what we're more used to seeing when you're going to a farm. Everything's like in a straight line row, spaced out so many feet and things apart. And then you also have the next thing is like broadcasting. With the broadcasting, that tends to be more for what I call like your salad mixes, things that grow really fast that you're going to do like a cut and come again sort of technique, and you're sprinkling the seeds out in a container area, in a container space. And then when we do our raised boxes, we do what we call like in-ground sort of like block planting. So everything is a couple inches apart. We make a grid. I'm gonna go a little bit in depth, a little bit about that. But these are like the 3 techniques that we do. Now, one thing that we do also in our in-row, single row planting is that we actually do a staggered technique. So we have like a center water line that runs in the middle, but we zigzag down in the space where our garden rows, our rows themselves, they might be 24 inches wide, and we stagger the plants so we could grow more plants in the spacing, but still giving it the amount of root spacing that it needs, but allows for us to grow a little bit more in that space to just having like a single straight line. Now, there are a couple things that we grow intentionally in a straight line because it makes it easier when it comes to harvesting. It's easier when it comes to set up our trellising system. So when we do cucumbers, tomatoes in particular, our eggplants, and we keep those really in a straight line, because as we're developing our weaving system and things like that, it just makes it easier overall for us to stay on top of it, and it makes it easier for harvesting, and it just makes it nice and smooth. Even with our beans, when we have them on trellises, most of the time we keep all those things in a straight line. But if we're doing like collards, kale, cabbage, broccoli, squash, we'll do a zigzag sort of technique through like the growing space. So again, this is just again talking about like our single rows, just what I elaborated on, like which ones we do in a single file row versus which ones we do in well, like they would do like the zigzag sort of technique. And again, it just kind of helps us with identifying the space, making it easier for people like to grow. So if you're a backyard gardener, these are what we recommend that you do like a single row. And then during the winter months, you can transfer it and do more like a zigzag diagonal sort of thing. So going back to like the block gardening. So one of the techniques that we do at the schools is that we call it square. It's a technique called square foot gardening. And so because of it being in a raised bed, we're actually able to divide that raised bed up into 1 foot by 1 foot smaller squares. And with those smaller squares, we're able to get our planting spacing correctly. It allows for us to maximize like the space. And so it allows for more expansion. It was designed by a gentleman by the name of Mel Bartholomew, who was an engineer. So he wasn't a farmer, but he understood how to be efficient and how to grow things efficiently in a small space. And so we use this technique a lot, especially at our school gardens, because it's also able for us to incorporate a lot of their math skills with the kids. We're able to talk about area, perimeter, multiplication, on and so forth. And so our benefits to why we are gung-ho about square foot gardening, especially again for like the backyard grower, the community grower. Number one, it's just easy to start. Just you building a box, putting the soil in about 15, 20 minutes, you're ready to go. Easy to do. With the soil mixture that we kind of talked about earlier, by adding that to like your raised boxes, everything is there for what you need. So there's very little like soil improvement that you have to do to get started. Low maintenance. We oftentimes talk about, especially when we work with like young people or beginning growers, that we want to create something that doesn't require a lot of extra labor. We wanted you to be efficient with your time so you can maximize your time to grow. The beds are like elevated. So again, it's in a controlled space that you're able for you to work with. It's easy for you like to adapt it to like your needs. So if you want to make it 2 feet wide or 3 feet wide, it's perfect. We encourage people, don't go any wider than 4. You can make it as long as you want to make it. And because of you controlling the environment, the spacing and the soil, it allows for you to have like a higher yield. And so with that spacing, you're able like to grow more in a space. That means you're going to have like more plants that you can eat off of and things like that. And we've seen just with our school gardens, like some yields that have like blowing our minds, where we're growing, 30 pounds or 50 pounds of carrots, like in a 4 foot by 8 foot sort of space. So there's a lot that you could do with it, with this understanding the system and how it works. So this is just sort of like a breakdown related to like square foot gardening, like what you really can grow per square. So in 1 square, you can plant like 16 carrots, salad greens, 16 radishes, on and so forth. 1 square, you could probably do 9 onion plants, 9 spinach plants, 9 turnip plants. 1 square, you could do 4 lettuce, Swiss chard. In 1 square, you could do 1 cucumber plant, 1 pepper plant. You can do 1 Irish potato, some strawberries, 1 kale. Now, there are some plants we have found through trial and error doing this that require more than just 1 square, but you still get a big return for it, how you plant it out. So when it comes to your broccoli, your cabbage, your collards, your eggplants, and like your bigger like bell peppers, you really want to put those use up 2 squares per plant. Now, and then if you're looking at using square foot gardening for your tomato plants and your summer squash, you want to use up 4 squares per plant. And that's just because squash and tomatoes in particular, they have deep roots and long roots. So you want to make sure that the plant has enough spacing for the roots to grow. But trust me, once you plant it, it thrives and it takes off and you're just like, whoa, look at all these tomatoes I have. Look at all these squash that I'm growing for like the year, for the season, to share with my friends and with my neighbors. Okay, so you got an idea of your spacing, you got your idea of what you're going to plant, you got it in the ground. And so the last half of what we're going to focus in on is just maintenance and maintaining like your garden space. So number one, feed your soil. So one thing that we encourage every grower, every growing season is at least add like a new layer of compost to like your raised bed, your in-ground farm plot, your container garden. Every time you plant, make sure to just add a little bit of compost. And what the compost is, it's a slow releasing natural like fertilizer. So it slowly like feeds the plant over time. And it also at the same time helps with building up the soil over time. Mulch. We also encourage people, especially when it gets into like the warm months, or even when it's like extremely cold, to start to put mulch around like the base of the plant especially if you're doing like the raised garden beds and the in-ground farm technique, to mulch around the base of the plant. What the mulch does, it helps insulate the plant itself. It also helps with like retaining like the water. So, here in Southwest Georgia, when it gets really hot, evaporation, it happens everywhere, but it's really like the ground never stays moist enough because it evaporates out. So the mulch also helps with that. And then also with the mulch itself, especially like we like to use a lot of like leaf mulch for our in-ground plants, our in-farm plants, that eventually that breaks down and adds organic matter back into the soil that we're growing in. And so by having that mulch as a base, again, this is for like the raised bed or the in-farm. And if you're doing it in containers and buckets, mulch is not necessarily something that you have to be concerned with. But if you're doing like the raised garden beds that are like 4 feet by 4 feet or 4 by 8, or the in-ground garden plots, just add a little bit of mulch around can really go like a long way, especially like we're about to experience like a freeze in the next couple of days. So here's a way just to insulate like the ground, especially like strawberries, put a little bit of straw around and things like that. Even like our fruit trees, we add mulch to like the base of it. So earlier I talked about one thing that you want to do in addition to like the compost is having like a way of amending your soil. When I was talking about that, getting a pH and a soil test, it's going to give you recommendations on how to amend the soil, what the soil might be missing. And so, but what we have is we call like a magic mix. So whenever we're about to do a new garden bed, a new growing space, we have like our own mix that we do. And most of these items you can find at the resource that I have towards the back that we mix together into like cups. So we just know for like a 30-foot row, we're going to do like 3 or 4 cups of this mix to kind of just mix it into the soil. If we're doing a raised garden box, we might just be doing 1 or 2 cups per box to kind of mix it in. And what this does, again, is just, it gives it an added like boost, added sweetener to your soil for the plant and stuff that you're about to grow and things like that. So you want to add a little bit of like so the mix itself is 2 parts. And what we mean by parts, this is you use like a cup. So a cup, 8 ounces, a measuring cup, kind of mixing these in. So you're talking about 2 cups of soil conditioner, 1 cup of azomite. And what azomite is, it's just like, it's a granular, almost think in terms of like gravel, but it's like biochar. It's some other elements kind of like mixed in that you mix it in with that. Mushroom compost. I always call it dolomite lime, but that's not the name of it. But what that does, it kind of adjusts your pH level. And then of course your organic all-based fertilizer to kind of mix it in. And again, it's just like 1 or 2 cups for a raised garden bed. And then for like a 30-foot row, we tend to sprinkle about 3 or 4 cups to kind of like mix it into like the soil. And then other amendments kind of based upon like your soil test that you kind of just want to know like a little bit about. A bone meal, again, adjusted like your phosphorus level. And that's really key, especially your phosphorus level when you're doing your tomatoes, your peppers, and things like that create like a lot of fruit. You just want to just make sure that like your phosphorus level is really, especially where it's at, especially like in containers. In our soil, we kind of have enough phosphorus in our soil, but if you're doing raised beds or container gardening, you definitely want to have like an amendment for like your phosphorus level. So bone meal and rock phosphate is really good. And then also you have like you want to have something for like your potassium. So green sand is a product that we use. So potassium, that is really key to like your root crops. So if you're looking at your potatoes, your turnips, your beets and things like that, here's just something that you can use, green sand, just to make sure you have what's thriving and things like that. So one thing as well, overall, we are fans of fish emulsion and fish fertilizer. And so most of our backyard gardens, even our school garden, I was talking about earlier, once a month, you want to just give your plants like an extra boost, especially again, if you're doing like the raised garden beds or the container gardens. So you could do like a fish fertilizer. A lot of time it's in a concentrated form, and you can add it to like a 1 gallon like sprayer or a watering can. But you want to just make sure that you're like feeding the plant. And then the other thing you could do once a month, just again, just add like a little bit of like compost. Don't forget to add the compost. That's pretty much what I'm saying. It's like add that compost around the plant, especially when you're about to plant them in the ground for the very first time. And then, a couple months later, you can sprinkle a little bit of compost around the base of it. It's not going to harm it. It's slow release it, but you want to make sure that you're feeding the plant monthly. You want to make sure that you have fed it on a consistent basis. Even when we do our garden projects, one thing that we encourage is having like a set schedule. You might just say, like the first Friday every 4 weeks. Every Friday, every 4 weeks, I'm gonna like feed the plant. I'm gonna fertilize Fridays. It's like a way we try to put it so people just know. All right. So watering. That like that's the key. So I talked about it earlier. You want to make sure that your plant gets enough the water that it needs. So there are definitely ways you can do it. You can do it your old school way, just hand water it with like a shower one. There's different things that you can use. Like we use a lot of our micro sprayer systems for our raised garden beds. In ground, we do a lot of drip irrigation. We've also started using a technique called Oya pots, and that's just a technique out of like the Arizona Native American culture, where they've taken terracotta pots, buried them into the ground and poured water into them, allow for the pores from the terracotta, allow for water like to seep through, and allow for a place to be watered while it's extremely hot and consistently having water. So people always ask, how do I know when it's time to water? Well, the simple technique, and this is old fashioned. Just put your finger to the ground. If it feels wet or damp, you go right ahead and you're ready to go. You're ready to water. Like you don't want to water if it's like wet or damp. You put it into the ground and it's like dry, it's just time to water. So what we try to do is encourage people at least know that most plants on average need about 1 inch of water per week in order for it to grow. So just kind of paying attention to like the water cycle. So like you receive like a lot of rain, you don't have to water as much. But also remember, like I say, if you're doing them in raised beds, or you're doing them in containers, you're going to have to definitely probably water more than if you're planting directly in the fields and farm rows and on and so forth. All right. So just make sure that it has that feel. And so as I said at the bottom, you want to kind of feel like a wet sponge. So you think about when you wring the water out the sponge, it kind of has like that little give. You want that to be like what you have like watering your plants. So that's like a finger technique out in the field. Sometimes we even take a little scoop of the soil, put it in our hands, see if it forms a ball. If it forms a ball and it doesn't break up, but it's not like soggy or wet, we know that's the right condition for us to water the plants. So conservation. One thing that we encourage most backyard growers to do is do a drip irrigation system. It's really simple, like the setup. It's just basically some basic poly tubing that runs along like the base of the plant. It puts water directly at the roots. Because of that, it goes directly into the soil. So it's less evaporation. A lot of times when you're doing like the overhead sprinkling and that sort of system, you're like just wasting water because they get into your walk paths and stuff like that. So this allows for like water to be in a very targeted area. And we really have seen it's amazing what happens by just having like a drip system. So all of our in-ground plots that we do, a majority of them we put on drip irrigation, and as well as some of our raised garden beds based upon what it is that we want to plant or what we're trying to showcase to the community as a whole. So the last piece is just something to kind of touch upon, because oftentimes I get asked, what do I do about the squirrels? What do I do about the rabbits? What I do about the deers? And our main recommendation is to put some sort of like fencing around. Now I know people have talked about like bird netting and things like that. The squirrels, they get all your cherry tomatoes if you let them. Then of course like your rabbits. But what we found is that some sort of screen fencing works best, where you've kind of enclosed the entire gardening space. Now we know that can be expensive, But what we found that to be the most successful, because when we tried to use the hoops and the bird netting like on top of it, we've seen situations where the birds themselves have kind of got caught in the netting, and it's not a pretty sight to see like the birds out there struggling, and they're trying to get free and things like that. And so we've kind of encouraged people, if you have the means to do it, just to build some sort of screen garden around your space, if you're really concerned with the squirrels, the bunnies, and the deers like getting into your space. Now, if there are some alternative things that you can do, and that's a whole another entire like workshop. So like the different products that are out there related to like bug and pest management, and I'll go a little bit deeper into those. But even if like on a small scale, there's a company called Garden Supply, where you actually can go to their website where they have like some 4x8 or 4x16 or 4x20 sort of like enclosed pop-up screen gardens that you can purchase. So you can maybe look into those if you're really concerned about the squirrels, the bunnies, and the deers, getting access to what you're growing in the garden space. So again, it's they're inexpensive, but they might be expensive depending on like your budget. So I don't want to tell people what to do, but what we found is a fenced in area has been our best deterrent of like keeping pests and things out of our garden spaces. And this is just one where somebody went over the top, where they really built like a backyard patio and the whole nine. So just as an example to kind of show you what can be done, they got like a chair in there and the whole gamut. All right. So all this that I showed you, again, we've been doing this for years now. And so this is just like an example of like what could be done. So this is just a typical just raised garden bed that we put in the back of a school. We maximize it using like drip irrigation, did the whole square foot gardening where we divide the garden space up into smaller squares. And we had so many plants per square. And the results was we had this abundant harvest with like young kids. I love like showing this picture because like things start off, no bigger than some of them with the turnip seeds were just about the size of like their little finger. Now a little bit of water, a little bit of a fertilizer schedule, like what we talked about. They had like an abundant harvest. And I mean, it was overflowing. I mean, it was just a beautiful thing to watch. So this is just some added resources for you guys. So when I talked about like your soil testing, again, there's just some backyard ways you could do it with like a scoop of soil and some water, put in vinegar or put in baking soda to determine if your soil is acidic or is alkaline and how to adjust it. So here's just some sites, but also I always recommend if you can, just like take a scoop, take it to UG Extension, might be $8 or so for them to do a soil test and send it back to you. When it comes to like the potting mix or the conditioner mix that we did locally, you could go to a Mulch greenhouse or a Bennett Feed and Seed, or you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and find most of those ingredients. Liquid fertilizer, like I said, we are a pusher of fish emoji, of fish fertilizer. There's plenty that are out there. So again, these are just some places where you can go to pick some up for what you need. There even some that you can order like online from Haas Tools, like Grow Organic or Beco Organic. If you're looking for like just some organic fertilizers for you guys to have and have access to. When it comes to compost, so field dirt, there are a couple places locally where you can go to get topsoil or field dirt. So Mulch Greenhouse, Lawn and Barber, Conyers Rock Yard, you can go there to pick up that stuff. When I was talking about the magic mix, most of that ingredients you can find at Mulch Greenhouse here locally off of Lido Road. You're looking for bulk. So let's say you are at the space where you want to do some multiple raised garden beds or in-ground field. You need more than 5 gallons worth of soil, or 10 gallons and on and so forth, where you need like a yard or more. We have some local places that you could go to purchase a yard by the scoop. They can deliver it for you. If you have access to a pickup truck, they can scoop and put it to the back of a truck. And there's also a company called Soil 3 that does the big yellow bags of like raised bed mix that you can call and have that ordered and delivered. And also, I want to make sure you have like your basic tools. So when it comes to backyard gardening, there's just some basic things to have in your tool shed. So you want to have some sort of spade fork to kind of mix in the compost or the soil amendments, as well as when it comes to removing like plant debris. You want to have some sort of like shovel or a trough to dig up the plants. And you also want to have a watering can. You know, again, if you are, especially if you're just getting your plants started, just to water your plants, and then a pruner to do any pruning that you might have to do. Your tomato plants, your peppers, that's like some of the leaves, some of the branches like die off. And again, I do a whole another workshop on how to care for your tomatoes that you guys should be on the lookout for. All right, and then again, like I said earlier, there's some online companies that you guys could really go to just to look for like garden supplies, the fertilizer like I talked about as well. And then this is just a list of some of the seed companies that we reach out to if you're really about starting like your own plants from like seeds yourself, that you can reach out to for different varieties. Like Baker Creek cares like I don't know how many different varieties of seeds you can find for every variety you want to taste. Johnny Select Seed, High Mowing, Haas Tools, Seed Saver, Sudden Exposure, Tetrorio Seed Company. These are just some basic companies that we work with over the years that will give you exactly what you need for our seeds and stuff goes. And so just as a closer, we do have some upcoming like workshops, like I said, throughout the presentation, where I dive in a little bit deeper in certain areas. So like the build a raised bed, coming up next Friday, I'll actually go step by step of how we construct our 4x8 raised garden beds, as well as how we build our garden container bucket stands that we use. So I will really go step by step explaining the type of wood, the type of tools, the type of screws we use for that. And then on February 18th, I'm gonna go in depth about planting a spring garden. That's literally where I go plant variety. So how do we plant carrots? What's the spacing on carrots? You know, how do we plant lettuce? What's the space on lettuce? What varieties of lettuce that we plant that are better for our climate? Where I really go detail description explaining what I'm planting, how I plant it, and how I take care of it. And I go crop by crop intentionally. And then I'm gonna do another, just a recap again, vegetable gardening basics, you know, the middle of March. End of March, I'll be coming back, going in depth about summer crops. So this is what I was talking about. How do we plant our tomatoes? How do we plant our cucumbers? Going in depth. And then I will close out with really 2 more workshops, but the main one again on the 1st of April, I'm really going to talk about pest control and what we really do for our community gardening spaces and things like that related to like growing food, how we tend to them, how we keep the bugs and diseases and things like that down to a minimum so you can grow food on and so forth, all right? So that's just like our basic sort of like contact information. So I'm gonna open up the chat box just to see if I had any questions. And again, I just thank each and every one of you for listening to me speak for about 55 minutes directly. So I thank you guys for your patience. So I'm going to the chat box. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jed. All right. So if you had any question that came up, feel free to do it into the chat box. And then, like I said as well, yes, well, the PowerPoint presentation as well as a video recording of this will be made available. And we will find like the means for those that have signed up to be able to send like a link of both directly to your inbox. And the good thing too is with the PowerPoint, I've actually added like some notes, because like even like you see on the slides, like I don't have every word verbatim that I have on the slide, but I've actually added some additional notes to the PowerPoint that you'll be able to look at. And then I like the PowerPoint as well. Like I have hyperlinks to those different resources that I talked about for you guys to have access to as well. Any other questions? I'm gonna stop sharing my presentation. All right, there we go. All right, so this way, if there aren't any other questions, we're right at 1 o'clock is how I like to do this, so to be done in an hour, and that's why we call it lunch and learn. So you can take a lunch break and be able to sit here and just learn something new. And then also too, for those that are participating in the call, in the Zoom, if there are other topics that you want us to go more in depth about, feel free to send an email to info@flintriverfresh.org. And what we'll do is we'll find like other speakers to kind of come in and talk to those areas. And what we found is that we want to just create a platform that everyone can like learn from and feel comfortable learning at their own space. And again, this video link will be sent to you guys with the PowerPoint, and then we'll also be adding this content to our website at flintriverfresh.org for you guys to be able to go back, refer to, and to be able to share with your friends and loved ones and family. And so again, this concludes our workshop. Again, I thank you for your time. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. So again, I am Fredo Jackson, Executive Director for Flint River Fresh. And I appreciate you guys taking this Friday afternoon to learn and to sit down with us. You guys have a great day. All right, bye-bye.